Does anybody know what plant I'm standing next to? Sycamore. Does anybody know the scientific name for that plant? Keep your mouth shut.
My lips are sealed.
Actually, the plant I'm concerned about is this one right here. Do we know what this is? All right. So, if you people are into scientific names, then join the California Native Plant Society and, you know, have fun. Okay? You go on a hike with them, and it's like you've got to be a Latin Greek scholar in order to have any kind of interaction with them. So we don't care about scientific names. However, sometimes they're interesting and descriptive and even entertaining. This one, this is like, is this a native or a non-native plant? I mean, we all know it's a parasite. Is it? It's invasive, right? Invasive? Is that what you? How many think it's invasive? Nobody wants to commit themselves.
No.
Non-invasive?
I think it's invasive. I say invasive.
Nobody knows. This is a native California plant. Phoradendron leucarpum tomentosum.
Of course.
I promise not to do that ever again. But what that means is white-berried tree thief.
Once again?
It's pretty descriptive. White-berried tree thief. And it is a thief because it does use this tree, but it also produces its own sugars. I mean, it's photosynthetic, so it only takes minerals and water from the tree, and it doesn't really kill the tree. It's what they call a hemiparasite. It's only half parasitic, not completely parasitic. So what would we do with something like that beyond looking at it and marveling at it? Well, I'm going to say this, and a lot of the information about Indians can be for mature audiences. And so, you know, you're going to, some of the things I'm going to tell you, treating you as adults, assuming that at some point you may interact with adults while you're here, you know, are not going to be useful for your children. This one in particular, because the seeds of this plant were used by the Native Americans as an abortifacient. It causes menstruation, it can cause a miscarriage, and so and there are a number of plants that they use for that purpose. Anybody see what's on the schedule there? What is? Oh, happy anniversary! We're celebrating an anniversary. Anybody want to translate that word that I have there and tell me how many years we're celebrating? Anybody ever heard that word before?
No.
But it's a good shot at it. It's 250 years. The country will be celebrating that in, what, 7 years? We're standing on something that is, in a sense, 250 years old, in that it is a non-native species that was here in 1769, 250 years ago, and the reason we know it was here is that we find it in the adobe bricks. When they make adobe bricks, they use binding material from any kind of plant material that they see hanging around there, and they would grab it and put it in a mixture. And they find these remnants of this from the 250-year-old adobe bricks, now 250 years old. So, and this is called filary, done with scientific names. And it's a good forage for cattle. That's why it got here to begin with. My favorite non-native species, cheeseweed. And this is the one that, Sandra? This is the one that a friend of mine who has horses gathers this up and takes it to the stables. And, but it's in, do you know that it's in the poisonous plants of California? Not supposed to be good for cattle, I assume horses, but her horses are over 30 years old. So the Indians they wouldn't say, oh, you know, we're natives, these plants are not natives, we're not going to touch them. You know, this is for the California Native Plant Society. And Robert, is Robert here? Okay. So he's our plant exterminator. He gets rid of these if he can. These he can't get rid of. Okay. All these, if you look over there, you'll see grass, right? And some more of this stuff, more fillery. And if you had an application, super app, on your iPhone, and you could focus it on that area over there, right around here like this, and you could press a button that said delete all non-native species. Not virtually, but really, if you could do that, all the grasses would disappear. Cheeseweed would disappear. It would be basically barren ground. The only things that would remain would be most of these shrubs, like that toyon there and that sugar bush there, of course the oaks, and all the shrubs are basically native. So what would be here if these natives had not come in here in 1769?
Bunch grass?
Bunch grass? A big debate about whether or not it was mostly grasses, and in fact bunch grasses, which most botanists think it was, or whether it was a whole bunch of flowers. And I've got on my outline two Spanish phrases that come from the diary of Juan Crespi, who was a part of the Portola expedition that came through here in 1769. He was instructed, and he's a Franciscan monk, so he takes instructions. He was not a monk, he was a Franciscan priest. And his instructions were to record the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And he took it seriously. And his diary is a magnificent journal of that year in California, 1769. It is the most highly resolved botanical survey. Obviously, he had no botanical knowledge, but he knew how to say, you know, live oak, a white oak. He had the Spanish words. He came from a Mediterranean climate, so he was familiar with these kinds of trees. He was using their words for our trees. And every 3 to 6 leagues, that's Spanish league is 2.63 miles, he would make a comment about what kind of plants were there, what he saw. The most highly resolved botanical survey for 100 years. It wasn't until 1850 the Pacific Railroad did a survey that was more highly resolved. In other words, had more comments about what was there for, you know, the smallest amount of time and distance. And he would say that what he was seeing was, any Spanish speakers? Zacate. Z-A-C-A-T-E. Zacate.
I think that means grass.
Yeah. And what about pasto? P-A-S-T-O. Yeah. The Spanish speakers that I talk to today always say zacate and pasto mean grass. But that word, and it was translated by the translator of Crespi's diary, in every case as grass. So all the botanists said, well, it was grass. We had grass. Bunch grass. That's what we had. Then this guy from the University of Riverside came along and said, wait a minute. You're translating those words wrong. This is 1769 Spanish. And the word pasto doesn't mean grass, it means pasture. In fact, if you go online and you go to the Spanish to English, and you put in pasto, it says pasture. And pasture doesn't have to be just grass. Pasture can be, Sandra, what do your horses eat?
Whatever they like.
Whatever they like. Could be flowers.
They do eat flowers.
Flowers. And so this guy wrote a book called the California's Fading Wildflowers. And it takes the position that these words were translated incorrectly, that he was really, Crespi was talking about pasture, and that it was probably a floral pasture primarily, with bunch grasses interspersed. When Crespi came back, because he went all the way up to Hayward, and then he made his way back, right? When he went up to Hayward, it was summer and then winter. All the flowers were gone in the first leg up. Coming back, it was in May, and he comes back to some of the same territory, and guess what he sees? Flowers everywhere. We had the fire that they stopped way over there. It never got to here. But the firemen came in and they cut all these shrubs down like you were coppicing a rose bush, right down to the bottom. They're all back. The Indians knew this. I'm sure they did. what you achieve, and they would burn these things. Now, they wouldn't set fire to shrubs like this and burn the whole thing. They would find a plant that they wanted to burn, and I'll tell you why. And in your outline, I have two really good, I tried to put only the best pictures in there. And you got two really good things that explain all about burning stuff and coppicing stuff and what it meant to them and how they could create, by doing that, materials in the shape that they needed them to make baskets, arrows, digging sticks, whatnot. And you'll see the difference between a twiggy thing that you can't do anything with and something that's real straight. Because what happens is when you coppice these, when you cut them down, they grow back straight and they grow back fast. So now you've got a nice straight, if it's like, say, a basket bush that they made baskets out of, you burn that, you can pile brush on top of these and set it on fire and burn just one plant at a time if you want. It burns down to the ground. Within 5 months, you've got shoots that you can use for basketry. And in there, it tells you how much stuff they needed to make even one large basket. And you won't believe it. I mean, we're talking about I'll just give you one number. A village of, say, 100 with, say, 25 basket makers would go through 250,000 stalks a year just making their basket. Tavium, virtually all of the California Indians were hunter-gatherers. Sort of Stone Age. Why they were hunter-gatherers when there were agriculturalists on every side of them in other places, why they stayed hunter-gatherers is an interesting question, which, you know, would take a long time to get into all the different aspects of it. But they did stay hunter-gatherers. They knew about planting. They knew what it was. They planted tobacco. Some of them planted tobacco and tended tobaccos. But everything else grew on its own. But the technique that they used to manipulate the environment so that they could get what they wanted from it was fire. Not just to get these straight sticks, but to create, and you'll see a picture in there of some flowers.
You wanna?
Yeah, sure. When you, these are on two sides, so I apologize for that. But this is a, I don't know whether you can see how deep this is. This is like probably, you know, 30 acres of one kind of flower, tidy tip. Tidy tip had seeds that they could use, that they could eat. And by setting fire to the grasslands, forelands, flowerlands, they could take advantage of the fact that these flowers, these annuals, were fire adapted and they would come back again. And so they would take patches of different areas and burn them each year. When Crespi came through here, I counted from here to Hayward. He says they've got really good pasture here, except for where the heathens have burned it all off. He said it when he got to the top of the ridge that leads into this valley. He said, it's pretty good soil, except where they burned it. But he knew why they burned it. He knew. So you guys are going to get into these at some point. Okay? Everybody likes to play with these, and the kids love them. And you know what they are?
Galls? He knows.
Oak galls.
This guy knows.
Galls.
There's really, there's 300 or so galls, different galls in California. They're made by different insects, and sometimes they're even bacterial galls. The little nodules on legumes that allow the plant to acquire nitrogen are actually galls. And these are made by wasps. This one is, you'll find this not on these oak trees. These are coast live oaks. But when you go down there, you'll find at some point some what we call scrub oaks. And this one grow on that and only that. Or I should say only on oaks of that particular group called white oaks. You've heard of valley oak? That one is white oak. So they will grow on that one. And this is the one that grows on the coast live oak. And the Indians would take a dried one like this, put it in a mortar, grind it up to a fine powder, and they would use it for an eye wash. Or they could use it for sores, cuts, bruises. It has an extreme amount of tannin in it, more than an acorn. And of course that's to protect the insect that made it. And sometimes all kinds of little creatures will be interested in the material inside the gall. And this, I don't know who did this, a bird maybe, a squirrel. This is from my own backyard, by the way. But they wanted that center, what's in the center, because when the gall forms, it starts with stuff you can eat, and then around that comes the stuff that's really rich in tannins, okay, so that it attracts creatures from coming to it. But somebody dug right to the center of it and probably maybe ate the larvae too. But it's very rich food right in the middle of it. One other thing that's kind of interesting, although it's not Native American, is that gall was used from, from Greek times to make ink. And it was used all the way up until the middle of the 20th century. The Declaration of Independence was signed by ink made from galls. Treaty was made with gall. You take the gall, make something called vitriol. You take some gum arabic, put it together to make the ink. It was better than India ink because it went into the paper. Okay? It fused through the paper. Whereas India ink would stay on the top of the paper, so it might eventually get rubbed off. The problem was the organic material in this thing would eventually cause the paper to dissolve after maybe 200 years or something like that. So a lot of documents that were printed with this kind of ink turn them into dust. All right, so I am standing on, what am I standing on, Ruth Ann?
Leaf litter.
Ah!
Is that what you wanted?
What's underfoot? What's under the ground? Over here.
China.
Who's the wise guy? I wonder who that is.
I can't.
Come on.
I don't know the question.
What's under this ground here?
Dirt.
What are these?
Roots.
Oh, wow, cucumbers.
So what must be under my feet?
Roots.
A big root.
Well, I didn't know how much under the ground you wanted to know about.
Get her! Get her! These are wild cucumber shoots. Wow. And underneath my feet is a root that's so big that they call it man root, which is from the fact that sometimes they're as big as a man. If you started digging this up, I don't know whether this one would be that big, but I've seen pictures of roots from this plant that are as big as, look, and they're kind of shaped like a man too. So it gets the name man root. And the reason that it has such a big root is what they call a geophyte, right? Because everything will, well, it will find another shrub to cling on to, right? You can see these little curlicues that are going to grab onto this. This is a mountain mahogany here. It's going to cling onto that. It's going to work its way through there. It's going to come up and over it, so it doesn't have to use any energy to hold itself up. It borrows that from this shrub. It doesn't hurt the shrub unless it gets real thick and covers up the whole shrub and blocks out the sunlight, in which case you'll have some issues. But it's curious how it finds those shrubs. You know, if you did a time lapse on this thing, you would see it doing stuff like this to find it. So what can we, it produces a fruit, which you probably have all seen. It's like when it's coming out and when it's succulent, it's green and spiky. You've all seen that. And this is what happens when it dries out and the seeds pop out of it, and they sound like a gun. If you're walking in the woods and you hear bam, could be wild cucumber shooting its seeds out. Seeds are really good. They're really robust. So you can see they come in different colors. And these are very old. I've had these for years and years and years. They look like locust stones. You see this? What's going on? Don't click up on me.
They're debating about the noise that makes.
You're debating about whether to go back and just forget the whole thing.
No, this is entertaining.
Know-it-alls. Remember the mature audience thing?
Yeah.
All right. So what can kids do with this? Well, what the Indians did is they made necklaces out of them. They made 3-strand necklaces with 3 colors. Now, if a kid saw this, what would he do? It looks like a pistachio nut, doesn't it? He'd crack it open and swallow it. Not good. Wild cucumber is a misnomer. It has nothing to do with being a cucumber. In fact, as I think my handout says, fun with scientific names and seeds.
Let me see, Jim.
Where is it? Yeah, sure. Where's the sign? Is the oh, here it is. Mara macrocarpus. Is that Greek or Latin?
Latin?
No.
Latin.
Well, Mara is the Hebrew word for bitter. So this is bitter big fruit. Comes from the Bible. Came to the land of Mara and brought it to the bitter, so we call it Mara. Inclement. People moving so they can stay warm. You can't eat those seeds. The Indians referred to it as suicide plant. A certain number of these seeds, and you will euthanize yourself. And they did that. They used it for that purpose because while you're leaving, you have a visionary experience. So it is also, I have someone I know who's a Chumash healer. They don't like the word hallucination. He prefers to call it dreaming. I prefer to call it visionary. You have a visionary experience as you leave the earth. And so it's nothing to mess with. It's also the seeds are used to make pigments. The seeds are used to improve hair growth. They're used to in medicinal treatment. They would actually, because when you burn these things to ash, they're like black pigment, and you can draw with them. And so they would draw on the person in the area where they had their problem, and then they would go through some ritual. But, so this is a very significant plant in the Batavian pharmacopoeia. We have another little plant.
It's native.
Oh yeah, it's native, and there are a few different species throughout California. But this one is what you see around here in the macrocarpus. Mara macrocarpus.
Looks like we're going to have a banner year for it too.
You think so?
Yeah. Last year they were kind of.
Well, it's kind of neat because when you bring kids through here, if it's at the right time of the year, they kind of grow up around there, and they have these wonderful little white flowers, and it looks like Christmas time. It's actually quite lovely.
What time of year?
Spring?
Yeah.
1 month.
Spring, and it lasts into the early summer, right?
But what's so interesting is the flowers are about the size of your little finger, and it grows to those huge pods. When they're really little, they're really cute because they have a little tiny green fruit with this very pretty red flower.
What? So, are two. When you're a hunter-gatherer, you can't plant anything. You can't plant the squash and the maize and the beans. You can't plant melons. So these are what you're left with. These are the two melons that we have in all of Southern California that are native. That's it, folks. And neither of them is really very useful in terms of eating. This one, not at all. This one is curious because this is called buffalo gourd, or down south it's called coyote gourd. It's also called stinking gourd. So that's why I wanted to use another scientific name, if you'll indulge me. It's Cucurbita furcidissima, which basically means a stinking orange ball. That's what that means. But notice, if you look inside it, after it's been cleaned out, it's kind of a nice little container.
Yeah.
It is a gourd, yeah. And nothing will eat. Sandra? Is Sandra here?
I'm right here.
Do your horses ever mess with this?
No.
No.
They move the balls.
Amazing. But they, won't even touch it. And it's just foul. In here is one of the most bitter substances known to humankind. That's what we have. That's what we have to live with. And, so you don't want to eat the pulp or even attempt to eat it. No animal will eat it. The only thing that'll eat this is a cucumber beetle. And they love it. They love it. And the flowers are beautiful. And the bees love the flowers. Bigger bees will hang out in a patch of these. By the way, we don't have these in the immediate area, this. There was one, I think, growing out at the front of the...
There was, yeah.
Yeah.
Across the street.
They travel, they distribute themselves.
What are they called again?
They distribute it's called coyote gourd, buffalo gourd. Buffalo gourd. They distribute themselves. Nothing will eat them. Nothing will, let it pass through their gullet and then poop it out and plant it somewhere or move it around or anything. So it's sitting there in its patch, and I've never seen anything eat it. I've never seen any evidence that anything has eaten it. So how the hell do they move around? How do they get from one place to another? Well, see how light it is? This one has no hole in it. And very light. But inside this thing, although it's probably a year old, the seeds stay viable. So it gets in. We had a big flood here. That's how that thing got there, probably. There's a big flood went through the creek and came down the street. And these things run into a rock or something hard. And crack open. The seeds fall out. Voila. We've got a new patch.
There's a patch that was growing up the canyon trail. We saved the canyon up here.
I've been hoping they would make their way down maybe to the creek bed. And
there was a large amount on the trail up there.
They're really interesting when you see them. I mean, it's kind of nothing like them. And they're usually out in an empty lot, and they're, all of a sudden there's this really crazy looking plant out there with all these balls on here.
And the first time I saw them, I thought somebody lost a load of tennis balls.
Yeah.
Because of that yellowy tennis ball color.
And in fact, I was reading something by a botanist who was experimenting with these things for one reason or another, and he asked some kids in the area where he was collecting them, gathered some for him, and they came back and they threw them at. Yeah. They were knocking because when they're full of pulp, they hit you. So it's like a desert snowball, something like that.
What color flower?
Huh?
What color flower?
Oh, they're beautiful big orangey flowers. The bees go in there and swim around and fall asleep. They love that nectar. You can take the flower and you can actually use it in baking. You can put it, who said it?
Like in a coffee?
Me.
Yeah. And and then I could talk about it obviously about these for a while.
You can make tacos.
IHD. Idea horn, right? So, but this actually has something edible.
Guarantee you we wouldn't eat.
in it.
You know what they look like, Kara, to me, the flowers? They look like squash blossoms.
Yes.
You ever seen squash
Yes,
blossoms?
in fact, the farmers
That's what I was wondering.
who plant cultivated squash
Big yellows.
down in northern Mexico and near the border have trouble with this thing because these will grow along the outside of the cultivated squash, the sweet squash, and they will cross-pollinate and ruin their crop. So, and they can't tell the difference until the cultivated squashes reach a certain level of development, one from the other. They look almost identical, but that thing is really bitter. But if you take the pulp away and you wash it away, and you really got to get all that pulp out of it, okay? And you just gather up the seeds and you roast them. You could. They're pretty dull at this point. They're kind of old, maybe.
I was going to eat
Yeah,
some
they look like
pumpkin seeds.
Yes.
30%
Yes, they are.
carbohydrates, 30% protein.
What?
Probably the best, richest, one of the richest wild foods you could actually harvest out here. You know. It takes a little work.
Let me see,
but-
Jim.
Huh?
Let me see. Wow.
Yeah. Perfectly edible. Perfectly edible. No bitterness. No sense of what the pulp tastes like. All right. By the way, I was going to say real quick one other plant because it's a really cool plant. And when you come by here, if you come by here with kids, you can do what I'm doing to a certain extent because you'll obviously drive them out of their mind. But anybody know what that is? Non-doses, please. Huh? Oh, it's a wonderful plant.
Flower goes like this. Okay, just think of it. Instead of going like this, it's going to go like that.
It's a peony.
Whoa.
It's a California or Western peony. It's native California
Oh,
peony.
it says right here.
I should have cheated.
It's a Peonia californica or something like that. So eat your heart out, Chinese. We've got our own peony. And I've got some peony seeds.
So keep your eye on this as you go. If you keep coming by in a couple months, you'll start seeing the bulbs growing, and then as it continues to grow, instead of the bulb growing upward to the sky, it gets so heavy it grows downward.
Yeah.
What is it like? It's more familiar.
It's kind of purple. It's almost brown. I mean, it's
Well,
burgundy.
I call it burgundy. Burgundy.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
It's
With
really
yellow
a beautiful
centers.
flower,
We
and
have a
you
couple in the park.
can't. It's like a like a weeping willow and wallflower, right? Don't look at me, I'm ugly. And then you pick this thing up and it's just beautiful. I have a picture. My wife is holding one in her little hand, like that. But these are the seeds in here. They're pretty robust. Just these seeds that I've shown you are not typical. These are robust seeds. Most of the seeds that the Indians ate were tiny little things that they collected. No, it's not something you would eat, but it makes an excellent pulse.
The flowers or the leaves?
So, seeds.
Seeds.
The root is highly medicinal. Okay, it's just like in Chinese herbalism. It has the same kind of characteristics. Thank you. All right, let's. Oh, by the way, I mean that's a gourd. I mean, this is like, how strong that is on the outside. The Indians knew this was too, insubstantial to make a rattle out of, so they didn't really do it, except that the bear shamans would wear 3 or 4 of these around their neck, and they would bounce together and make noises that sounded like a bear, they thought. So they had other uses. They were used as a container, for drink of water, as a cup or something like that, but not for this purpose. I'm not gonna put that in there. All right, what's next? What's on there?
Houses.
Oh, houses. Well, we got houses. So, you know, this is the basic idea, but I have a picture of a house. In your handout, you'll see a picture of a house built in 1925 at the first time it was there, from Chumash. And the houses they built were similar to the Tataviam houses, and you can see how big this thing is. I mean, it was huge. Am I making you feel something that I shouldn't make you feel?
No, it's fine. Yeah.
You built this, right? This is your baby, right?
Yeah.
Not after you told me it was wrong.
No, it's not wrong at all. You can see it's the same thing, right? It's just smaller.
People can come through.
Dispute about whether what we should call this thing, and there is. Let's face it. There's no word that we know of from the Tataviam for house. We don't have that word. In fact, I got in a debate with an anthropologist who runs a press publishing operation up in Northern California. Oh, I'm sorry. Come on through.
Hi. Hello. Hello. Have a good hike.
And the debate was about which is the most lost tribe in California? What tribe do we know the least about? And of course I argued for the Tataviam. And he said, oh, no, it's the Esalen. That's that tribe up there where they have probably some of us may remember Esalen.
Yeah.
A retreat for people who need serious self-help. And the tribe up there was called the Esalen. And he says, oh no, we know so little about them. They're definitely, well, he ends up writing a 163-page book about the Esalen. I challenge anybody to write an authentic pamphlet about the Tataviam. So how do we know anything about them? Well, we know a little bit, very little, because of some information that was collected by ethnographers at the turn of the last century, back in the early 1900s. But not much. So in order to determine what they might have done, what their culture might have been like, we can go a long way in determining what they eat, because everybody ate the same stuff in this area and how they prepared it. And I've got a list going back to the Portawa expedition in Crespi. Crespi told us everything they fed him. And I've got a list at some point in that outline of the foods that he ate when he came through Tataviam country. It took him 5 days to get through here and get out of here down past Piru. So we know at least from that what kind of foods they were eating at that time of the year in August. It's the same foods that other tribes in the area ate. But what about the culture? You know, how do you retrieve a culture that's been that lost? You have to make what they call ethnographic analogies. Okay, so there are other tribes in the area that were like them. They spoke similar languages, must have had similar rituals, blah, blah, blah. But there's very little real evidence about what made the Tataviam unique. But we have enough words, and I know all those words, and I could teach you those words in half an hour. You don't need babble, okay? You can learn the entire remnants of the Tataviam language in about half an hour with a little work, because some of the sounds are a little peculiar. And, you know, for a long time, people said that the Tataviam were peculiar and weird, and they were called a Chumash word, aliklik. Maybe you've heard that word, aliklik. And it meant grunter or stammerer, as if they were some kind of, you know, little ogreish people who grunted and stammered and whatever. Not true at all, and it has nothing to do with who they were and what their language was like, except for one word. We do have the word for yes. We don't have the word for no, but we have the word for yes. The word for yes has all of the linguistic difficulties associated with their language that we would have, the unusual sound. It's that if any of you have any linguistics in your background, there's a sound that these languages in all these areas, Chumash, they all have the sound in it. It's the way the linguists show it. It's an upside down E, and they say it's sort of like stuff. It sounds like what you would say if you were stepping on a squishy insect or something. Yeah. And then it's got what are called glottal stops. Glottal stops are what the sound of uh-oh, uh-oh. It's in between uh-oh. So the sound is and the glottal stops make it And so if they were talking to Tavium and they were, getting a response for yes, and they went maybe they would have the opinion that they were kind of weird. But it's silly because all the other words don't sound like that at all. All the other words to me are quite lovely. And I'll just give you a couple of them. It's not something you would normally use, but they're authentic and they're real and they're a little bit of leftover from a world that's disappeared, a cultural world that's disappeared. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Tavium today, because they are today, and I have no idea how they would feel about what I'd say. I really don't. And I've interacted with them, and they're lovely people. And they do put up with a lot of BS from people like us. But take, for instance, the word for dog. The word for dog, and there were dogs, yes, dogs all over California in prehistoric times. There was a pack of dogs that followed Crespi all the way up to here. Every village he came to had dogs in it. And he would say, there was a black dogs, there was a piebald dog there. And the dogs were useful because they kept the wolves and the grizzly bears away. Kind of spooked the horses. And, can you imagine with mules and horses coming through this part of the world before there were any improvements? And you're making your way through chaparral and over rivers, and then a horse or a mule gets spooked and takes off into the brush for like a couple miles, and you got to go find him in a place that no white man has ever been before. So let's take the word for dog. The word for dog is kuli. Kuli. K-U-L-I. Not pronounced exactly that way, but kuli. Now, what's interesting about that word is that, and let's do a little geography now, because I really think everybody should have in their head an idea of where the Tataviam were and who were right around them, so that you think of this area as if it were still inhabited by these wonderful tribes that were here. So the tribe that was north of them, there were two tribes that were north, in the Antelope Valley and in the southern Tehachapis and in the Tejon Ranch area. One of those tribes was called Kitanimuk. Another was called Vanume, which actually is the most extinct tribe of all, it turns out. But the Kitanimuk are alive and well to a certain extent. I'll tell you something about that very interesting in a second. But their word for dog is Kutsi. So Tataviam is Kuli, Kitanimuk is Kutsi. To the east are the Serrano and Cahuilla people out there on the Morongo Reservation with the big casino, and they're lucky, they got a reservation. Their languages have both been preserved into the 20th century. They had native speakers in Serrano up until about 2004 when Dotha Ramon died, and only I think one of her children was left speaking something like fluency, but he had no one to talk to. I don't know whether he's still alive. She was 91 or something. And the famous Catherine Ann Sobel, who was this woman who walked around with the anthropologists and gave them all this incredible information, she died. But there are still a few Cahuilla speakers left. But the Serrano word for dog is Kuchi. So Kuchi, Kutsi, Kuli, it's one of those linguistic universals. It tells us that the Tataviam were a Udo-Aztecan speaking tribe, and that in fact they were a Takik-speaking tribe. They were in that group of Indians, speaking that type of language. So we know that, okay? We know they're an Uto-Aztecan-speaking tribe. We know they're Takik. We know a lot more. I can't go into the whole thing, but let me just give you a couple more words from their language, which are kind of interesting. One is the word for muchachito, a little boy, is piquatarucu. Piquatarucu. The word for a small antelope, tutanarucu. The word for an old woman, nitaruku. The word for an old man, nurakavu. The uku is obviously a diminutive, and it's unique to the Tataviam. You don't see it in Serrano, you don't see it in Quitanamuk. Chumash speak an entirely different language than all the, they're not Uto-Aztecan speakers, completely different language. Oh, by the way, south, well, who are south? Tongva, Gabrielino, Fernandino.
But Fernandino and the Gabrielino, they were not actual tribes. They were conglomeration tribes that came along with the
Missions.
The missions that they brought in the tribes from nearby, which is how the Tataviam lost their identity. They became Gabrielinos.
Well, they didn't. Okay, so what? Let me move to there because I don't want to go on. But you know, you can see the language is I think, lovely. By the way, one other expression which has been preserved is the expression "kakava apak ati," which means you are a farter. Now, I got that wrong. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's not kakava apak ati. That means something else. It's Turvang Atsu Iru. Okay, I'm sorry. Turvang Atsa Iru means you are a farter. Kakava Apak Ati means rat's heads. And that was the word that the Tataviam, God bless them, used for the Tonoreños, the Yokuts in the Southern Valley Yokuts. So these people were calling each other, insulting each other. The Quitanamuk called the Ventureño Chumash, the ones that called the Tataviam grunters, they called them ugly talkers. Kashanahunyaka.
Did they understand each other? Different language?
Okay, so let's jump in there and see if we can make some sense out of this whole thing. So, okay, so, but first, before I do that, remind me I have to talk about where we are today. But
I need to do that then.
How much?
Well,
It's 10 too.
All right, let's just make some music real quick. You know what that is?
deer hoof.
It is. It's a deer hoof rattle. And those are real deer hoofs. Now, I've got here a flute and a whistle. And, you know, if you had to decide which one of these would be the thing that they would use in their... hey. Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. Okay? What do you think? Well, the whistle is... they played this thing all the time, drove the Portola expedition nuts. Because they play it all night. And they hated it. They just hated it. But these are the whistle is what they use for their most sacred rituals. Not the flute.
Really?
No. You'd think it was the flute's kind of neat. Four-hole flute made out of a deer bone tibia. Deer tibia.
Wow.
This is not the tibia. This is the tibia. The whistle is made out of the tibia. I got confused because it was one of the most significant archaeological sites in North America was something called the Bowers Cave. Some of you may know that. It was found locally up here in the hills. It had in it a cache of ritual implements, and included in there were 45 deer tibia whistles. And they were much bigger than this, but they had this knuckle on it, okay? So that's how I got confused. This is a tibia, but they took the knuckle off, okay? This is a bird booty. And you can't get these here, so I had to get these from the east. A guy made them in the east, North Carolina. And so this is made from a white-tailed deer, not a mule deer. So it's smaller, because the mule deer is bigger out here than the white-tailed deer. And this is made from a swan. You might say, how dare they? They go swan hunting in North Carolina. They're allowed legally to hunt swans. And so this guy has all these bows, and he makes these wonderful whistles and flutes. But this you use for, you know, love making. This you use for ritual whistlers. They had 45 of these in their cache. So,
What about the
and this was used, so you would have a couple of old men in the ritual area, and they would have, each man would have 2 of these in his mouth. And then they would sing songs. I want to talk about what you were talking about before we're done. And I have, you know, there's a lot more information about what we might assume the Tataviam culture was like. But I'm now beginning to understand that we probably don't have enough time to get too far into that. Let's see where I was on there, if there's anything. I am not. Oh, eagles. Let's talk about eagles, because I have to. Who's got the eagle feathers? Thank you. We know, we're pretty much sure, there's very little reason to doubt that the Tataviam engaged in 2 ritual activities that everybody else engaged in. Not just the Uto-Aztecan tribes like the Cahuillan, the Serrano, the Quitanimo, Gabrielino, Fernandeño, not just those tribes. We know they did because we have ethnographic evidence of that. The Tataviam must have done this too. There were 2 rituals, the eagle dance and the eagle killing. The eagle killing ceremony was one of the most, if not the most sacred ceremony. It involves animal sacrifice. At least it's not human sacrifice. But frankly, the eagles, this is a wonderful bird that you just can't imagine why anyone would want to do that. And they would go and they would, like these guys who get the condor eggs, you know, and rappel down the cliffs and, you know, swish the condor out of there and get the egg. They would do that. They would get to the eagle's nest and they would get these baby birds. Usually they take 2 at a time. They take them back to the sacred big house, the Kichadarach, and they would give them to the Kika or Kikai. It's almost certain that the Tataviam word for chief was Kika. So if you want to use that, by the way, the house would be, it's okay to use the word Keech. I've decided that Keech is probably our best shot. It's the same one the Serrano used, and it's very similar to Gabrielino and very similar to Kitani. So we'll use Keech. So they take it back, and then these eagles are raised up to a certain age where they're fully fledged and they have feathers the size they want them. And then they engage in a ceremony where the shamans will come out and dance around with these birds, and they are trying to persuade the ordinary people that their power is what causes the bird to die. Their spiritual power. The eagle represents immortality to all of these tribes. It's the sacred bird. It was a sacred bird at the beginning. It preceded humanity, and the eagle has sacrificed itself for the benefit of the tribe, of the lineage, for its continued life, and so. But you know how you put that together with killing the bird. Well, they have their reasons and their explanations. But what the shamans would do is they would slowly suffocate the bird as they were engaged in the rituals. Then they would take the bird's feathers and they would create, and I have a picture of that in the back.
Jim, would I be correct in assuming You know, like when I've been up in Alaska, you see bald eagles, you know,
It's a
swarming
bald
like
eagle
crows.
that they use,
But I'm
by the
saying,
way.
you see the-
Golden eagle. It was a golden eagle.
No, but when I was up north, you saw bald eagles swarming like crows. There were so many. Were there lots more golden eagles down there?
Well, you know, you'd think so, but apparently they would get them, but not everyone would get them, and they would actually, oh God, shelbies. They would trade for shelbies or some kind of ritual exchange if some tribe, some lineage or clan didn't have the birds. It's a big deal for these people to trade things back and forth. And for all these tribes were connected. That's why we sometimes can make assumptions about Tataviam, because they're right in the center. They're like Switzerland, right in the middle of everything. And so they connected us with all these tribes, and there was an elaborate network of ritual exchange that went on all the time. And I'm going to show you what the most indicative object is of that.
Why do you hear more like in history of like the Zuni tribes or like the Pablo? Like I feel like in history, like when you're studying like anthropology or just any type of like U.S. history or California history, you hear more like about Zunis or Pueblo people, but you don't really hear about like.
Tell me about it. You're preaching to the choir.
So I'm just like wondering.
That's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to. I'm trying to, and it bothers me that people don't understand how unique these tribes were in California in so many ways.
Until
and
I
that,
came on the nature walk, I had never even heard of the Tavian people.
of course, and this, they didn't make bonnets, war bonnets, but they made eagle skirts. And this is a eagle dancer. So these feathers came from the birds that they killed, and then they would have another ritual they called the eagle dance, which came at the end of their mourning ceremony, which was a salute to life. Okay, so it's the only animal sacrifice that I'm aware of that they did. And all the different tribes did it. And here you've got a picture. This is actually a Cahuilla eagle dancer. Okay, obviously we're going to have a picture of a Tataviam eagle dancer. The Tataviam, all right, and this will wrap it up, okay, guys?
So it was the Chumash who called the Tataviam a liquid?
They supposedly did. There's a whole story behind how that word came about, but that's what everybody said for a long time. Here is supposed to be the last of the Tataviam. Juan Jose Fustero. Okay, it's supposedly a full. What's the damn funny? I'd like to know what is so damn funny about this picture.
He's playing through the last.
Oh, he says, yeah, sure, he's the last of the time. What's wrong with this picture? Is this an Indian or is it a cowboy? This is the, if you remember Ishi, the last of the Yahi, you all guys know about Ishi, the last of the famous Indian who came out of the woods in 1911. This was he was interviewed in 1915 or so, and from about 1912 to 1915, he didn't know how to speak Tataviam. He didn't speak Tataviam. He spoke Kitanimuk. Goes along with what you're saying. He knew a couple of phrases that his grandparents that he remembered from his grandparents. One of them was Ha'ikwa, which means, how goes it, friend? And so he wasn't much help in terms of, he told the ethnographer that he didn't really care much about old Indian things. So he, God bless him. If you go to Vasquez Rocks, you'll see this blown up. It's a huge picture they have on the wall up there. And I think that the Tataviam today honor him as being one of their last pure blood survivors, perhaps. Although I think he may have been at least 1/8 Kitanimuk or Serrano. But I just couldn't resist putting this picture there. This picture, these are two of his kids. He had 8 children. And this is Nina and this is... But the two loved each other. They got their lunch pails. This is 1892. Their lunch pails. These are the Leckler kids. These kids would work for them in their household as housekeepers. They didn't like working there. The reason they didn't like working there is they thought they would get sick. And in fact, 2 of his daughters died from measles. Wow. In the late 19th or early 20th century, measles killed them. So they still hadn't developed the immunity to that disease. Anyway, so what happened, Sandra, is there was a Fernandino, that's San Fernando Valley, a Fernandino dialect separate from Gabrielino. They also referred to as Western Gabrielino, and they had certain different cultural traits, but they're basically included now in the same group. What happened was the San Fernando Mission brought in, it was 40% Gabrielino, Western Gabrielino. It was about 25% Chumash, 25% Tataviam, 24% Kitanimuk, and then the rest of them, about 9%, were various other Serrano tribes. So these people went through the mission system together. They intermarried. When they came out of the mission system, 40 years later, they were all mixed up. The language that survived, became the dominant language for one region or another. Kitanimuk has survived more. Gabrielino, by the way, or Tongva, has a much longer word list than the Tataviam. And they even have some expressions. It's, probably a couple hundred, 200 to 300 words that we have. The words that I just told you from Tataviam, there's maybe another 10 to 15, and that's it. Yeah.
Is the Tongva and the Gabrielinos, are they the same, you say?
Yeah, well, there's different groups. Okay. There's different groups. There's different Gabrielino groups, and they fight with each other over various issues. Okay. Some of them want a casino, some of them don't. Gotcha. Some want to call themselves Tongva, some like Gabrielino. The Indians that from our area, the Fernandino, they refer to themselves as Fernandino. They want to distinguish it because of the mission. They want to be identified with the mission San Fernando. And I said, well, why do they want to be, it's like when the Jews want to be identified with the death camp. Right. Why do they want to be identified? There's a practical reason why. Mission Indians, legally defined for part of the Indians in California, were recognized by the federal government in the 19th century. The newest tribe in this part of the world is the tribe called the Tijon tribe. It got federal recognition in 2012. And it got it by having, there's 7 criteria for recognition, but because they were recognized as a tribe in 1915 and 1933 based on some surveys that were done, the criteria were reduced to 3. Now they only had to meet 3 criteria. And so they were recognized and now are a federally recognized tribe. And called it, but guess what? They include Kitanimuk, Southern Valley Yokuts, and Kuyama Chumash. 3 completely different linguistic, not even the Kitanimuk are Takik, the Yokuts are Penutian, and the Chumash are Chumash language. Different languages, completely different language groups. But because they were all associated in the same area historically for so long, they met the criteria of recognition. Our tribe here calls themselves a Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. Why? Why are they doing that? In the 19th century, the Luiseno, Cupeño, those are the ones that have the Pachanga Casino. The Kumeyaay, those are the ones down at the border there, Yuman speakers. And the Cahuilla were all recognized as Mission Indians. There were 3,000. They did a survey. They got something like 3,000 Indians were included from San Diego County and San Bernardino County, not Los Angeles County.
What was his name again?
Juan Jose Fustero. Real character, a lot of stories about him. But
Jim, at one time, I thought the Tatavians were told that they would have a reservation, and they kept after it, and they kept after it, and kept after it, and they never got their reservation. They never got recognition, and by the time they finally got somebody to work for them, there weren't enough full-blooded.
That's the Fernandeño.
That's the Fernandeño.
The Tataviam and the Fernandeño linked up. They're two different language groups.
Right.
The Tataviam language, the words I just said, you don't sound anything like Gabrielino. A study was done trying to find out which language the Tataviam sounded more like. And the linguist at UCLA, Pam Monroe, wrote a paper about it and compared it to Kitanemuk, a tribe up there, Tuvatulabo up north, and what was the other one? Kwaisu, which is a Numik-speaking tribe in Tehachapi. And she compared it. It turned out that it's most like Kitanemuk, and not like Gabrielino at all. They split off 3,000 years ago. They're different in many ways, biologically, linguistically, but they never had the opportunity to make that argument. The application on the part of the Fernandeño Tataviam Indians for recognition is at the Department of the Interior, Indian Affairs. They made that application some time ago. The government has responded to it. It's called the Office of Technical Assessment of the Indian Affairs of the Department of the Interior. And they have this bureaucratic agency that goes through their application and, picks it apart. And they determined that they don't fall into this legal category of mission Indians. Wow. So the fact that they call them, that's ridiculous, they're mission Indians. Wow. But what the government said was, look, quit trying to tie yourselves, go back through the mission registries and tie yourselves into the villages. They wanted to tie themselves into Tahunga, which was a Gabrielino village, Cahuenga, which was a Gabrielino village. A couple other, the one out here that they were tying themselves into was called Chaguayanga, which is at the Castaic Junction. There's just a couple of families that are arguing that they can tie themselves in to a Tataviam village, okay? Government said, we don't buy it. We don't think you can do that. But we'll make an alternative suggestion. You went through the mission system. You're now a combination of Chumash, Western Gabrielino, Tataviam, and Serrano. That's a historic tribe. Tie yourselves into that. And what I like about that, and that's the last thing that on my thing about transnationalism. I went up to a powwow, and then I'm going to end it. I went up to a powwow a few years ago at Mount Abel. It was called a Chumash powwow, and I thought I'd go up there and see what was going on. And if you'll notice, the instruments that we had were the flute. I don't have my clapper stick, so I didn't bring my clapper stick. I'm done. Clapper stick, there it is. This was their rhythm maker. No California Indians had the drums. They were non-drumming, which is something people don't. So I go up to the powwow, and there's these guys sitting around with this huge drum, and they're boom, hey, hey, boom, boom. And I'm thinking, so to wrap it up, I think that if the Tataviam want to regain something that in the area of language and culture, which, by the way, I'm not speaking for them at all. And if you want to speak to them, you can go help them build a village up in Camulos that they're building right now. But and they do this anyway. Identify with other Indian cultures that have languages, like the Kitanemuk have a much more of a surviving language. Or the Serrano, there's a whole dictionary and grammar for that, Why not incorporate, if you want to speak an Indian language, which I do, and I'm sure they would love to do it, and they do have language training courses, why not just, go transnational? We're all one group in the end, right? And I think they do that to some extent, but I don't know whether they do it. They want to identify with a language that's really is specifically theirs, but it just doesn't exist anymore. So find one that does, but it's close enough. All right, we'll call it a day.
So no.